Well, hey there, Larry. Happy Sunday.
Well, hey, Andy, it's kind of unusual to be on Sunday.
Definitely. Sunday afternoon because you were busy yesterday. And do you want to talk about it at all?
It would take the entire podcast. We
How
could
about,
just
can
say
you
it.
give me the 30-second version? Where did you go?
I went to the land of space aliens, Roswell.
Did you find any?
Didn't find any. Had a
Did you
had a
find any people that represented aliens well at all?
didn't have time. Went to a political function.
It was funny. I don't want to bring up politics because we've been bashed pretty hard for that this past week. We got bashed both on the left and on the right for pretty much the same
I'd,
thing, which
I'd
is
like to
really
I'd like
bizarre.
to I'd like to take some time to talk about that
I
if
would
we
too.
could. I would very much like to take some time to talk about that. The person who bashed us saying that we were Trump promoters. I have a recommendation for anyone. Please listen to the podcast because there's no way that you could come away from this podcast and conclude that we are Trump supporters and Trump promoters. If you do come away with that conclusion, you're listening to some other podcast, not this one. But that person didn't actually listen to the podcast. What they did was they looked at the promotion that goes out that contains the headlines for the stories which we don't write the headlines. We pick stories, and the headlines are those who whatever publications, whether it be the Washington Post or whatever we picked, those are their headlines.
Well,
So that person,
part of that, I mean, I do sort of write snarky headlines about what we were going to talk about, and sometimes I do make them sarcastic. That little block that goes out, there are, to a certain degree, they are written by me, but I'm just taking like the context of what we said and trying to make it something enticing for people to catch.
well, this person that the most recently complained about the headlines that were actually the headlines of the stories,
Okay.
and her issue was that she didn't like the promotion coming out from Narsal because let me find what she actually said. But those were the headlines from the stories, and first of all, this is not Narsal. Narsal merely helps us spread the word, but
Yep.
but this is not Narsal. This is Larry and Andy, and this is not Narsal. But she says, I quote your article: New York has insane restrictions. Trump said. Well, that was not our headline. That was the headline.
Right.
It's a very scary time for young America. That was the headline. That
That
was
was the
not
headline.
that was not us saying that. Restoring balance to campus sexual assault rules. I believe that was the headline. We didn't write that. Will liberals suffer consequences for courting Gorsuch? That was the headline. These are headlines from the stories that we talked about. But we're far from Trump supporters. Now, having said that, I'm not like the people who found fault with everything President Barack Obama did because it was Obama. I am looking for ways to support the President of the United States. I just have a hard time finding them. But there were people like Rush Limbaugh who said, and I hope Obama fails right after he was elected. If we could probably find a recording of him saying that, I hope he fails. I have not said that about Donald Trump. What I have said is I disagree with him on policy. I'm all about policy. I disagree with ballooning the national debt, the runaway military spending. I disagree with the deportations. I disagree with closing the border. I disagree with building the wall. I disagree with the tax cuts for the wealthy. We have to pay our bills in this country. I disagree with the ramp up of law enforcement that he has done, seeking maximum penalties. I disagree with him gutting environmental regulations. I disagree with the president. I agreed with him on the making some balance for campus sexual assault investigations and calling for a more robust due process for those accused of sexual assault. I've said that, and I've said I support the president. I will support the president when I can support the president, but I can't change my lifetime views because I don't agree with the direction that he's leading us. So you who didn't bother listening to the podcast, we are not Trump supporters here, but we do try to be fair. And if someone wants to come on the podcast, and if they want to show me that we're not ballooning the national debt, that we haven't ballooned the deficit almost double what it was when Trump took office. Now, this is the most robust economy we're supposed to have had for all these decades, but yet the deficit's going through the stars. with these tax cuts, it's supposed to actually shrink the deficit. Of course, it never does. It never has, and it never will. But that's what people say. And the only time when I say never, it probably did in the 60s when we had 90% taxation rate coming out of World War II. Those tax cuts were helpful, and even maybe in the Reagan administration when we still had a 70% rate. But the rates are already quite low. We're in a 30% maximum tax rate. We're not like those oppressive rates of 90 and 70%. But folks, please listen to the podcast, and we'd be delighted to hear your feedback, be delighted to respond to it, but it does require that you actually listen to it.
Definitely. I'm going to try this real quick, and I will cut it if it doesn't work. I found a 48-second clip of Rush saying, "I want Obama to fail." So pretend in your head that we're like this is going to work. And if not, then we'll just move on.
They called General Petraeus a liar before he even testified. Mrs. Clinton said she had to willingly suspend disbelief or whatever to listen to Petraeus. We're in the process of winning the war. The last thing they wanted was to win. They hoped George Bush failed. So where is it? What is so strange about being honest and saying, I want Barack Obama to fail, if his mission is to restructure and reform this country so that capitalism and individual liberty are not its foundation? Why would I want that to succeed?
So that's him saying it.
Well, that was one of the many times he said it, but he said it on his show that he hoped to. Well, I actually, when Obama was sworn in, I actually hoped he succeeded. And let's just roll back the clock since we got on politics. We had an economy that was hemorrhaging 700,000 jobs a month for the last half of 2008. We had a stock market that was in free fall. We had a Dow that had lost 40% of its value. It finally lost about 50% of its value. We had the auto companies collapsing. We had the financial system seizing up, banks going out of business, Bear Stearns, all these major brokerages were going out of business. We had we were on the verge of a cataclysmic disaster, and if you're going to hope that a newly elected president fails, inheriting that sort of mess, I can't imagine what type of American would wish such a thing. I hope that Obama succeeded, and he did succeed. The stock market tripled from 6,000 to 18,000 when he left office. With 17 created million new jobs net, not counting the hemorrhage of the job loss continued through the first year or so of his administration. So we had a deep hole to dig out of what, but I think it was like over 23 million jobs total, but 17 million net jobs. And the auto industry recovered, the economy recovered, but all those numbers were deemed phony until the new president came in, and then the same numbers that have been reported consistently for several years, 200,000 plus new jobs being created, magically became the best numbers you could ever imagine. And they were no longer phony.
Why do you think that is? I'm being facetious.
I think a little bit of intellectual dishonesty. But for Rush Limbaugh to hope the president fails when he inherited the mess that he inherited, I have to question that type of hope. I think that anybody would hope the president succeeded, and I hope this president succeeds at the things I support.
I mean, wouldn't the president succeeding or failing then directly reflect on us succeeding or failing as a nation and as a society, as an economy, as an education center, as an intellectual center?
Well, I would think so, but like I say, I hope this president, when he's leading us in a positive direction, why would you not support the president just because you're not of his party? We haven't had we haven't had any missiles launched, I think, since about last November out of Kim Jong-un. I'm happy about that. Maybe we have a diminished expectation of war on the Korean Peninsula. That's a good thing.
It could be a thing. He's like, I mean, I've heard people on that particular subject that so many other presidents have been promised things from him, and this is just the same thing being promised again. But to your point, supposedly they're supposed to be opening up the missile sites for inspectors.
Well, if that would be a good thing, and if it turns out that we actually get verifiable dismantlement, I would be giving kudos to the president. I mean, Obama would never get a kudo, but I would certainly give a kudo for that. If he succeeds, that's good for all of us, good for global security. Same thing with Iran. That's what the treaty was. What that was trying to de-escalate the propensity of a nuclearized Iran. But everybody was all upset about that, and I think this president walked away from that. But anyway, we're getting way away from our mission at hand here. But I'm just sorry that people feel the need to criticize the podcast and accuse us of doing something that we're not doing. We're not promoting Trump. NARSL is not a partisan organization. We don't endorse parties. We do talk about politics because we live in a political system. Decisions that are made are political decisions. And we talk about which ideology is more likely to make a bad decision that will hurt us. Typically, we're going to get decisions that are going to be disadvantage to us more from conservatives. We say that, but it's not exclusively conservatives. The liberals will give us bad policies when it comes to the Me Too movement. I've actually said that. I've actually said that many times. I disagree with my liberal colleagues on things.
Well, and then also in the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about Kavanaugh and that the whole situation there. So we have also received feedback from people about that process of being anti-conservative at the same time from a different person talking about us bashing Kavanaugh as being the next. I guess the person was saying, how can we do that if that's going to be the person that's going to save us in the Supreme Court?
Well, the record on conservatives saving us is not very good.
I'm just all I'm trying to make we had a person on the left saying that we're Trump supporters, and we also had a person on the right saying that we're bashing Kavanaugh. So it's just like we got hit in the same week for hitting on both sides of the coin, which is really bizarre.
Well, the one you just described, he's actually listening to us. The person who did the first bashing that say we're Trump supporters, they didn't listen to the podcast. So we have to give the second one a little bit more credit because he's listening to what we're saying.
I hear you.
And I don't fault people for not understanding that conservatism is not what it. I used to be one for many years, and I believe deeply in. But when you look at the record, if you actually analyze, if you actually pull Supreme Court opinions, and you look at things related to criminal justice, whether it be search and seizure, whether it be habeas corpus proceedings, whether it be prison conditions, you always see the conservatives giving the benefit of the doubt to law and order. So I just don't think that he's going to be our savior. I hope he is, because he's there for the next 30 or 40 years. Right. But I don't. Right. His judicial philosophy doesn't give me that encouragement. But it's what we've got now, and I said that on the podcast. We were fearful back in the 70s when Justice O. Douglas stepped down, and an unelected president who had not even been elected vice president appointed a replacement, a conservative Republican president who had never been elected to national office, was allowed by a Democratic Congress to put a justice on the Supreme Court. Can you imagine that being flipped over? If an unelected president that was a Democrat under the McConnell doctrine, what they would have done,
right. No doubt.
But we allowed for Justice Stevens to be confirmed almost unanimously, and he turned out to be a very fine justice. Let's just hope that that's what happens with these two, because that's all we've got is hope.
And back to your point about trying to avoid politics. It took me a long time to figure this one out, but I mean, even in your school system, it's politically charged because politics will go around what the curriculum is. This issue, obviously, it's very political because depending on who we vote, that is what's going to drive what law tries to get onto the floor for them to vote. Science, it's political. Your roads, it's political. For them to build a business up the street is political because you got to get the city council to approve or what's the term, rezone to let it be residential, commercial, whatever. It's all political, whether you like it or not. That's the system.
That's our system. And it tickles me when people say, I hate politics. Well, then maybe you need to push for a different form of government, because ours is about securing support to do things through a majority process.
I guess the other way would be to go for some kind of dictatorship. I guess then you don't have to worry about politics so much.
Yeah, you certainly wouldn't. But everything in our system is decided by politics. And,
all right, well, that's a 15-minute rant there.
All right, let's get on with it.
Okay. Well, we love your questions and we love your tips and your feedback. And I would like to give a big shout out to our patrons over at patreon.com/registrymatters. It's the best way to support the show, and we love each and every one of you. We also love the ones that aren't doing Patreon, but hey, got to make a buck, right? And our thanks to you. So join the crew that makes Registry Matters happen. Join us over at patreon.com/registrymatters. We got a bunch of voicemail messages this week, and so we're going to go through them. And I know you haven't listened to them. I don't think they're going to be that awkward for you to catch up to what's going on. So here we go.
I have two more questions, just very quickly. I don't understand why an offender's date of birth is important to be displayed on the registry page, because in most cases they show the person's age anyway, and the fact that they're on the sex offender page anyway with their photograph and their identifying details and their address and all that, isn't that enough? I don't understand why the date of birth is important, because my concern is with different websites around the world scraping information off the registry pages, a date of birth is, I've noticed when calling different agencies, they always ask for my name and my date of birth, and then they ask for a home address. And if someone wanted to pretend to be me to get my personal medical information or something like that, they could easily look up a name on a registry page and the date of birth and the address and get information like that.
This guy is talking about basically people doing identity theft in some form or fashion. And so what do you think what is the validity, the rationale behind them putting your date of birth up there?
Nobody ever thought about it. It would be like if you roll back the clock, registries have been around since the 90s, before the internet was widely in use, and we have adapted practices. If you look at most court websites nowadays, I know state, if you go to, in my case, look up the date of birth is no longer there. If you go to detention facilities, the date of birth is no longer there. There's a lot more conscientiousness about redaction of private identity, personal identity files like that. If you go and purchase a court document from the clerk, they go through with their black marker and redact personal information. It's never been brought up to anybody about this. I'm sure that at the time that it's just one of those things where, I mean, he's got a valid point. It would be easy to use that information that's on the registry to help augment and facilitate identity theft, but no one's ever gone to the legislature and said, "Hey, we need to suppress that field. It serves no purpose and it aids in identity theft." And trying to find a lawmaker to carry that's going to be problematic. Why problematic?
Even though, I mean, like it's a legit identity theft claim.
Yeah, but it's for a population that's it would be easier. It would be easier to roll that into something bigger that you were doing for the registry. When you're trying to do something that's just for the benefit of registrants, the risk of getting vilified is enormous, because the other opponents are going to say, "Well, he did something that helped sex offenders." That's the fear. Now, this particular thing is so narrow focused, you might not run into the resistance, but just when you knock at the door and you say, "I'd like to use sponsor something." Well, what you got? Well, it's about identity theft. Oh, okay. And well, sex offender specific. I mean, there's going to be an immediate reaction from an elected official about that, is, I don't want to be tied to sex offenders because it's easy to vilify.
Now, suppose you were to bring an actual challenge against it, and just narrowly focus it right here on this. I guess the person would have to prove that identity theft occurred and that they got the information from the registry website?
That would be one avenue for looking at a challenge if you actually suffered harm. Another avenue would be to look at your state's policies in terms of protection of private data and see if you can make the argument in a lawsuit that this is contrary to existing state. You would need some of that damn liberal overreach for the courts to have to. They would have to infer that in other areas of personal protection, you'd have to say that they clearly omitted and intended to do this, and then you would have a court like Nebraska say, well, they didn't say that, and therefore we're not legislating from the bench. We're not going to infer that. Or you could have a bunch of liberal do-gooders who would say, well, clearly they intended, and that was an omission, and therefore we're going to use our powers to say yes, that would be covered by the protection. It would require whatever state he's in. There's some research to be done if there's already protections that he could argue that this should fall within that umbrella. That would be my thought.
I'm thinking back to 5-ish years ago where the Office of Personnel Management had all that data taken. I mean, like, I don't remember what the number was. I think it was in the millions of people, and even like the signatures behind fingerprints and obviously all of your history. This feels like it's right in line with that. It feels like, just right on the face of it, it's just like Equifax last year got hacked and lost everybody's data for all credit in the United States, and then even many in Europe had all that credit data stolen, which would be included in having your date of birth. It seems like it's not even anything you'd have to be like, well, gosh, can you really give me any arguments for how you get here? No, really, it's right there. It's really easy to figure that one out.
Well, I would suggest that if he has the energy to put into it, to contact a lawmaker and possibly do some legal research to see if there's already protections in the state statutory scheme for people's private information. And
that's interesting.
The registry sometimes specifically says what information must be disclosed on the website, and sometimes it says this information may be disclosed. Sometimes it's a shall, sometimes it's a may.
Okay.
And sometimes it's very state specific in term, and sometimes it says certain information shall not be disclosed.
All right.
And you would want to add this to the list of things that shall not be made public. That would be the ideal. If there's a section of, I think he's in New York, but if there's a section of New York statute of what is prohibited from being made public, you would want to add this to that list.
All right, let's go on to number 2.
Well, hello, Andy and Larry. How you doing today? It is Monday, and I was calling you, specifically Larry. Again, this is Christian, Minnesota, your favorite guy from Texas. Here's the scoop. You guys did a deal about the deferred adjudication in Texas, and that's correct. I took deferred adjudication for 10 years, way before the deal came out, for the September 1st, 97. I just wanted to mention there's 3 lawsuits. Richard Gladden filed one in federal court in Austin. Terry Estes Hightower, which she would be happy to come on the program and discuss her lawsuit. I did talk to her last week, and she would be happy to discuss if you want to. I can give you her contact information. And then there's another lawsuit, a state lawsuit that is before the Texas Supreme Court. Same concept as Richard Gladden's is, if you took a deal before 1997, probation or deferred, that you would not be required to register. So anyway, I wanted to throw that out there for those 3, and that there's 3 wonderful lawsuits taking place, and hopefully some good news out of that. Appreciate it so much. Thanks, guys. Thanks for doing a great job, and hopefully keep hearing more from you. Thanks.
What do you think?
Well, I think that he's right. Those lawsuits are the best thing going, and I don't know the status of them. I will try to reach out to one or the other or both to possibly have them as a guest on the podcast or on an Arsenal in Action call.
Cool. And then go ahead.
Because the people who thought they were bargaining for one thing obviously did not get what they were bargaining for.
So that's where people took a plea 20 or 30 years ago and said, here's 10 years, you're done. You get off paper and they go, oh, hey, now we're going to institute this registry and we're going to suck everybody in from the back.
Yeah, they went back retroactively and said the registry applies to people who previously didn't apply to, and it's one of the many tools that you have to use to try to chip away. And if you made a plea bargain for the registration was a significant part of the negotiation, where there was a lot of times where it was never discussed. But if it was an integral part of the negotiations, and then the state changed rules, like I said, I will endeavor to get Ms. Hightower or Mr. Gladden or both. I don't think they'll come together.
The thing that always strikes me when they say pulling these people in from the back is the punitive nature of the registry and how it affects. But then on the flip side, somebody that has been convicted post the institution of the registry, it's a civil regulatory scheme, it's not punitive. How can it not be punitive for one group and punitive for the other one at the same time?
I don't think I completely follow that logic.
But the people that are being pulled into the registry are claiming, rightfully so, that the registry is very punitive in nature of having your information released, the stigma of having an employer being able to search or people in your neighborhood being able to search, and those things that go along with it. That argument isn't valid, maybe that's not the best word to use, but the argument for people that have been convicted post the public registry being in place don't have that argument that it's all this punitive stuff, that it's just a civil regulatory scheme. What's the big deal?
I believe they do, but they don't have the same argument that they do. You've got the argument for the people who clearly their offense predate the registry, or the registry requirements were enhanced significantly after they began participating in the registry scheme. Then you've got the people who committed offenses after there was a registration scheme, which they knew that there was a registration scheme, but where it gets dicey is when your punishment ends. The registry is not a part of your punishment. So the same argument would be valid, in my opinion, once your punishment ended. So, for example, if you got a split 10-year sentence, 5 to do in prison, 5 to do on probation, there's 10 years where we can do a lot of things to you, and we can inflict punishment as a society. But when you get past that 10-year and 1 day, then the punishment has to evaporate once you've served it all. A registry, even though you committed the crime after there was registration, if the requirements of that registry are so punitive, you would still have a case. You just wouldn't have an ex post facto case. You would have a case that would sort of be an ex post facto, because you're still being punished after you're ended. But it's punishment is not the same type of ex post facto claim, but it would still be an ex post. You would still have the claim, but it's not exactly the same claim. The punishment needs to, what the average public citizen doesn't understand is the registry is not a part of the punishment. Right. And they say, well, NARSL advocates for people not being punished. No, actually, boys and girls, we don't advocate for that. We advocate that once the punishment, which we think is awfully harsh, but once it's expired, we advocate that we restore American values and we don't punish people after they've done their time. It's really not all that damn complicated. But they try to twist it and say we advocate for no punishment. No, we don't. We think the punishments are excessive. We think going to jail for decades for viewing images is ridiculously long and harsh. And we think that consensual sex with people who are near the same age being imprisoned is excessively harsh. But once they've been imprisoned, once they've done their post-prison supervision, we advocate that they be allowed to go on with their life, and that the punishment of being precluded from doing things, being able to live and work and associate with whom they choose, that's not America. That's what we advocate for. So try to get straight what we're advocating for. The naysayers out there who say we advocate for no punishment. We don't do that.
Got it. And let's do this third email, and then we'll hit the articles fast too.
Good morning. This is William. Last week on your most recent podcast, you dealt with 3 issues I brought up, one of which was the 11-day curfew that Tennessee registered sex offenders are subject to. And I have looked and researched in detail, and I cannot find any statute that put Operation Blackout into place. And I'm thinking this is just something the state has been doing because no one has challenged it. The closest thing I could come up with is a law that prevents sex offenders with charges involving minors from wearing costumes out in public that would be an attraction for children. Other than that, I can find no specific law that says Tennessee sex offenders shall be on an 11-day curfew during the time prior to and the day after till the morning after Halloween. And I just wanted to call and clarify that there's no statute. I cannot find one. I went to avo.com and asked that question. It's one of those free Ask a Lawyer sites. And I asked yesterday, and usually questions are answered within 12 hours. I have received no answer. So that means either none of the lawyers care to answer that type of question, or there just simply is not any specific statute that gives the state the authority to impose that curfew on both supervised and unsupervised sex offenders. And I'm going to get in contact with the representative of Tennessee for Change, which is this Tennessee affiliate with NARSL, and see if we can't get something together and challenge this like your co-host suggested. But I wanted to call and let you know that there is no law that puts Operation Blackout in place. Please, Hook, have a good one. Thank you for all the work you do. Take care.
So you can't wear a costume that would be enticing to a child.
How's that for void for vagueness?
I don't know what that, I mean, because a kid could be like, oh my God, goblins. Wow, those are really awesome. But, I mean, I guess if you're running around wearing like a SpongeBob costume, yes, that would be enticing to a child. But good grief, that's pretty vague.
Yeah, well, in terms of Operation Blackout, we at NARSL consulted with a Tennessee attorney. Since NARSL doesn't have any attorneys directly on staff, we consulted with a Tennessee attorney a year ago, and the attorney advised us that there is a statute, and he referred to, I believe he said Fall Festival, but he said it applies to all registered offenders in Tennessee, and he was going to be on our last Halloween marathon, and for some reason he didn't make it. Don't know if he had a schedule conflict, but we'll invite him back again this year for the caller in Tennessee and see if we can get clarity of where the statutory scheme is. I don't think it's in the sex offender registration statute. I think it's in another section of Tennessee law, but he did say that there was a fall festival period of time where people could not decorate and had curfew, but being that we're not qualified, I'm not going to tell you that there is a statute and what that section is, but we were told that by an attorney.
Interesting. Well, let's hit some articles. But thank you very much for the voicemails and questions. It's really, wow, that was crazy. My Alexa just decided to kick on and make some noises at me. Anyway, yeah, thank you very much for the questions, and please keep them coming. This first article comes from letgrow.org. Larry, you gotta love this one. Any child over the age of 12 caught trick-or-treating can face 6 months in jail. This is in Chesapeake, Virginia. Can you imagine you're, 14 years old and you're like, hey, let's go trick-or-treat. Nope, can't do it because you're over 12. And you could get a not less than $25, but not more than $100 fine, and up to 6 months in jail for trick-or-treating.
Well, I'm a dubious person about fake news. I have not researched this, but it is entertaining. But they've cited a city statute code section here, section 46-8, subsection A. If any person over the age of 12 shall engage in the activity commonly known as trick or treat, or any other activity similar character or nature under any name whatsoever, he or she shall be guilty of a misdemeanor, shall be punished by a fine of not less than $25 or more than $100, or by confinement in jail for not more than 6 months, or both. It is kind of humorous.
The same rule applies in Norfolk and Suffolk, Virginia. That's just bizarre. I always remember, like the older kids going out and doing the more kind of like the trick kind of side of things, and then the kids were doing the treat kind of side of things. But can we just take kids out of being kids then?
I don't see any problem with it. I see the term hooligan down here. Do you see that the rules turning a holiday that used to celebrate childhood independence?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that paragraph. Do you see they got hooligan down there? Anyone above age 13
yes.
has a potential hooligan.
Oh my gosh! So the person that is quoted there is like 99 years old to use a term like hooligan. One of your people, Larry. One of your people.
Oh, gotta love it.
Yeah, that's good stuff. All right, and then
if it's true, it is humorous.
Well, I mean, they have the statute of 46-8 or whatever that is back there, and I did see it from a person that's very active on the Virginia scene. I saw that she had that posted up on Twitter, and that's just.
Well, there were supposedly sex offenders being butchered all over Ohio here a couple of days ago, and that turned out to be fake news. So
wait, I have that article in there.
Oh, you do?
The Macomb County fears vigilante serial killer after third pedophile murdered in 1 week. That's fake news?
That's fake news.
Oh my goodness. I didn't know that. All right. Well, then we'll cover it when we get there, but we might have to redact all of it and retract it. Well, this one from the Star Telegram, Texas Supreme Court asked to hear sex offender law challenge. This is related to what we were just talking about from the caller, right? This is where the people, these people were sentenced back in the day, and then they get sucked into the current registry scheme, and they're complaining about it.
Yeah, it says they've been asked to, and Supreme Courts get to decide in most instances what they hear. There are certain things that, like states that have the death penalty, for example, they have an automatic appeal to the Supreme Court. There are certain disputes that have to be decided, but by and large, Supreme Courts decide what they're going to hear, and they've been asked, and I don't think they've decided yet. That's what this article corrected, that they have not decided to accept the case, to grant it certiorari, but they have been requested.
It says that 2,800 sex offenders remain on the Texas registry despite being no longer required to register under the terms of their probation, according to an Austin American Statesman analysis of the list.
But the prosecution says there's not a problem with it since it's non-punitive and civil and regulatory. They don't see a problem with it.
Exactly. That's the dichotomy that I'm facing. That the cognitive dissonance of, well, no, there's no problem. It's just civil. But again, then you end up with people the articles in Tennessee or whatever that was, where the guys run around shooting up people's houses. They only found that because of the registry website. How is this not punitive? It makes no sense that anybody could honestly make that statement. Well, let's move on. There's an article from the Boston Herald, and then there's sort of like a companion article that from Reason.com. Sex offenders have access to kids on Halloween. In Massachusetts, there's a law to stop monsters with candy. You can't put out your pumpkins because all this stuff it's like a field day. It's just like it's a kid in a candy store when you have the kids run around with their candy. So all the sex offenders are going to go out there and go find all the kids with the candy and abduct them and do horrible things to them.
Well, the headline, sex offenders have access to kids on Halloween. How would you stop that? Assuming that you wanted to, how would you, how would we do that? But since all people who've offended are not in prison, how would we stop them from having access to kids? Would we lock them up? Would you be willing to build the detention facilities to lock these people up?
And what's to stop them from finding kids any other day of the year, like at, I don't know, Walmart? There's a really big toy section at Walmart, and Toys R Us is now closed. I can see that it makes bad sense for a registrant to go to Toys R Us, but you got to go to Walmart to buy your toilet paper and other things, and then there's this big kiddie aisle. Well, if you really wanted access to the kids, you could totally just do it anywhere else.
It's crazy, but it's sensational journalism. Sex offenders are forbidden from driving ice cream trucks, according to this article, and I think this is from Massachusetts, right?
Mm-hmm. Boston.
Yeah, they're forbidden from. But yet they can hand out. First of all, they should not be banned from driving ice cream trucks. If they've paid their debt to society, if they've served all of their time, they should be able to have any job that anyone in society is allowed to have, that they have their credentials to hold. If the employer wants to have them driving an ice cream truck, they should be able to drive an ice cream truck. We should not have occupational debarment with some rare exceptions. But this is it's like there's states have these long list of things that people are not and then not allowed to do, and then this feeds off of that. Well, if they're not allowed to drive an ice cream truck, why would they be able to hand out candy? I mean, for heaven's sakes. In my state, we don't have any occupational debarment. A sex offender can do any job that they're hired to do. You may have an occupational license debarment issue where you can't get the license that's required, but there's nothing in the sex offender statute that prohibits you from doing anything.
Right. Do you where do you stand on that particular issue of having where all these different trades that people could get into that require licenses, felons can't get those?
I'm actually kind of torn. I think that licensing is necessary for protecting the public in certain situations, but I think maybe we might go too far. Anything starts out as good, and then it becomes a self-perpetuation, self-fulfill. It's like, yes, we need to have certain minimum standards for people to do jobs, but I'm wondering if the standard should be their competence in doing the job, and how much we should factor in the background. But then arguably you get into, well, should you allow an accountant who's been embezzled twice, should you allow him to have a CPA license and continue to embezzle? Or should he be?
Yeah, right. I've thought about like even using the ice cream thing. That seems like it would put you in direct access to something that maybe you have a proclivity for. It seems rational, just for that like tiny little isolated case. But like the mom in Virginia on the registry for not reporting her kid, why can't she drive an ice cream truck? But she's on the registry. She's a convicted offender. Blah blah blah. So she can't drive an ice cream truck. It seems completely unrelated.
Well, that's why I'm saying that, from my personal opinion, occupational debarment should be very sparingly used. The courts have upheld it as being permissible, but I'm skeptical of occupational debarment. It has to be a compelling reason to not allow someone, assuming they're qualified. Now, people don't read into this. I'm saying that anybody who's unqualified should be able to do anything. I wouldn't want people in cosmetology and cutting hair. Although you really can't do a whole lot of damage cutting hair per se. It's eventually going to grow back. But I guess if you put it to dental hygiene and things where you're using sharp instruments, I wouldn't want people who are not qualified to be using those instruments. But to me, in supervised environments, most of these jobs are really in supervised environments. If you're cutting hair, you're usually not alone, right?
I would think. I don't go to a place by myself, but I have gone to a person that did it kind of in a shop in their backyard.
Most of these jobs are with the evolved technology we have today. I can't think of many jobs where if you work at Allsup's, nobody knows what Allsup says. If you work at Circle K or 7-Eleven, you're not unsupervised, although you may be periodically in a store by yourself. There's usually at least two, but you're supervised by technology.
Yeah, certainly. I just wanted to point out that the companion article from Reason, the title is "Fear-Mongering Article Falsely Claims Halloween is Christmas for Sex Offenders. Pushing for new laws aimed at keeping kids safe from sex offenders on Halloween is nonsense." And that's actually from Lenore Skenazy, who wrote the article. I didn't see that she had written that article beforehand.
Yeah, Lenore is really all over this of getting people, try to get people to think about their fear mongering, and she's the world's worst mom, according to some.
That's if you Google the world's worst mom, you're going to get Lenore.
Yeah, she let her 10-year-old ride the subway in New York home so to see if he could be responsible enough to do it.
I believe the kid made it.
He did.
How could this happen of having a 10-year-old on the subway and then make it?
Yeah, well, believe it or not, there's a lot of people who will protect children when they're in public. I saw what is that show that Unsolved Mysteries, where there was this girl traveling. She was older than 10, but certainly preteen or right at teen, and she was traveling across the country running away from home. And she was white, and these three black guys befriended her on the Greyhound bus. And they went to great lengths to make sure she was safe, and they figured out she was running away, and they encouraged her to get on the old-fashioned payphone that they had in those days to call her parents and tell them that she was safe. And then they did a reunification, assuming this was all true, but they did a reunification years later where she got to thank those guys for keeping her safe. But my point is that humanity tends to protect children. If you're out and you see a child in distress, more than likely you're going to get protected by a stranger rather than abducted.
I would agree with that.
The overwhelming reaction is to protect the child. If you see a child that's going to get hurt.
Well, that's good times too. You put an article in there that comes from the Philadelphia Citizen, and it is an op-ed, I guess commentary about abolish prisons. It's pretty aggressive article talking about abolishing prisons entirely. And a lawyer and advocate calls for ending our expensive culture on incarceration and instead spending money to help prevent crimes in the first place. It's a pretty long, a reasonably long article as articles go. But I mean, you've told me that past about 2 years, prison doesn't perform any further function as a deterrent, as things of that nature, if I have that worded right. But yet we throw people down for 20 years and do nothing in the process of trying to get them ready to come back out. And then we say, hey, have a nice life and good luck to you, probably knowing that 60-something% of them are going to come back because they don't have any resources to help them stay out.
I had a sinister motivation for putting the article in, and I just wanted to illustrate conservative ideology. The conservatives constantly rant about liberals. All we want to do is throw money at problems. And they tell us, you've got a failed system. You should not throw more money. All you people know how to do is throw more money at a problem. But yet that is always their solution when it comes to something that they agree with, for example, like incarceration or whether it be military spending. They don't use the same response if you need to work smarter, you need to develop a new system. They say for us that we need to stop throwing money at our bad education system because it's a failed system. We need to look for new approaches. We need to do charter schools. We need to do vouchers. Well, I would like for the conservatives to adopt that same exact philosophy that they've sold me on when it comes to prisons. Prisons are clearly failing because the prison rate is astronomical. I mean, it really is off the chart. So if we're going to spend all this more money that we've spent, and this article shows that the prison population has ballooned by 700% since the 1970s. If we're going to spend all this money, we're doing exactly what conservatives say that they don't approve of, which is just throwing money at a problem. Let's don't throw money at a failed system. Let's come up with a new system because you've sold me on a better way. But they don't actually practice that when it comes to prisons. We just, in my state, gave the corrections officers a 20% raise, which I do not begrudge to them. And we gave the state police a 20% raise, which I do not begrudge to them. That's not what I'm saying. But we didn't give the teachers but like a 2.5% raise. The same arguments they made for the prison guards and for the state public safety officials, officers, to get a 20% raise as they were understaffed and that they couldn't fill their positions and that they were losing personnel to the forces of competition. We make those same arguments about education. And while we have inexperienced teachers who don't have the proper credentials, we make those same arguments and they shoot us down and say, all you people want to do is throw more money at the problem. I put the article in here for that reason. I would like to say to my conservative friends out there, which is a significant part of this listening audience, let's don't throw more money at a broken system and incarcerate more and more people and give the prisons more and more money because they're failing. Let's buy into your philosophy and let's find an alternative solution rather than incarceration and see if we can do it more cheaply, more efficiently, and with better results.
Let me ask you this question about like the process of making the sausage, so to speak. If a company were going to transition from one process to another one, they may not just whole cloth go, hey, we're just going to scrap the whole thing and we're just going to start over. They would go from point A to point B, but they would build 10, 20, whatever steps in between, and they would figure out how to transition across, moving this segment over into that little corner of things, or anyway. It doesn't seem that politics works that way. It seems that it's either all or nothing, and we can't try and build like, hey, we want to get to this new model of prisons. we can't just shut down the prisons and start over. How do we convert from where we are to where we would want to be and build a timeline, but have milestones and steps along the way? It doesn't seem that politics is designed to work that way.
It is tough because you've got a vested structure interest in preserving the status quo. This dramatic change is very frightening, and it doesn't matter if it be prisons or what it is. The status quo. These people, they've done the same thing the same way for all these years, and they're not going to want to. I mean, I think you would start on the reentry side because that's the easiest to tackle. The people who have been sentenced, we really can't undo their sentences. So we start trying to improve the odds of people on their way out that are coming out, because people are going to be released regardless of what amount of time. People are going to be released. So there's a constant pipeline of people. So I think you would focus on the outflow by improving the likelihood that those people won't become a recidivism statistic. But that's just a beginning of the step of reentry. You've got to make sure that the people that are getting near that pipeline on reentry are properly equipped, because if you're leaving the prisons with no additional skill sets than when you went in, regardless of how well the reentry people are trying to find you housing and trying to find you connections, your success is going to be diminished. But so you have to start working on the programming within the prisons. Then you get right down to the actual infrastructure. Do you need all this hard infrastructure that we have that's very costly to build and maintain to keep up to incarcerate the type of people that we have behind bars? I don't believe we do. I truly don't believe that all this security and all of what we spend on prisons is necessary. I believe we could confine people a lot cheaper with technology. So it's going to require a step-by-step looking at what part you can politically tackle first. And cost is always going to be a factor, because when you start doing reentry, the prisons are not going to magically give up their budgets to support reentry, which means you're going to have to go to cash-strapped lawmakers who have all these competing requests for money, and you're going to have to say, we want to create a new reentry component of our prisons. Oh, yeah? Well, what are you going to defund for that? Because taxes are evil. In America, no one likes to pay any. I mean, they always perpetually like tax cuts, and then when you start cutting, I had a guy that's an advocate. I shall leave nameless, but he's complaining about cuts that are happening in prisons here, and I said, well, we've been in a very recessionary environment in our state for several years, and we've been in a very slow recovery and revenue since no tax increases of any type have been tolerated by this governor. There's a struggle to make ends meet. We basically have been living on the same income we had 10 years ago with no adjustment for inflation. So what are we supposed to do? You don't like anything cut. You don't like to pay taxes. What do we do? The prisons are not going to stand up and say, hey, I'd be willing to give up 20% of our budget for reentry. They're not going to give up their security budget. They're not going to give up their medical budget. We don't think we spend enough on. I don't think enough is spent on medical as it is. So where's the money going to come from? It's going to be a painful transition because it will require upfront investment to pay off. It's going to require spending more to spend less, and that's not a popular thing to advocate for, particularly for prisoners.
But aren't the liberals, if this is a conservative initiative, aren't the liberals going to go, hey, you conservatards, you effed up, because they're going to watch it like a hawk immediately afterward, looking for any failure so they can use that as talking points for the next election. Same thing goes the other way. The conservatives are going to look at the libtards and go, oh my God, you guys, you couldn't even make this work. You spent all this extra money. It was a failing plan. So both sides are going to use it as talking points in the next election. We can't just be honest and go, it worked. Great, the other team got it. Sorry, they get to spike the football this time. Hey, everybody wins, really, in this particular environment because we have less recidivism and lower money spent, etc.
Well, it's and then how long it'll take for it to pay off. These cultural changes you don't see results overnight. When you start improving your education system, if you've got K through 12 in shambles, and you start improving your K through 6, the 7 through 12 without anything touching them, they're going to continue to progress on the old regime. Well, these changes we're talking about, there's not going to be immediate results visible. It's going to take
You're talking
years
4, 5, 10 election cycles before it's a long-term investment, and we are very much the microwave generation of looking for an immediate win. And yeah, our politics is not. It's almost like the what's the word I'm looking for? The profit schedule on the stock market. Everything is driven by quarterly profits. You can't have anybody looking at a 50-year time frame. They have to be looking at this year, next year, looking to drive profits immediately.
Well, I think we talked about something similar on the podcast one or two back about the disaster planning that we have in America. We do a response cycle to rebuild.
Correct.
And we talked about the model of actually preventing the disaster to begin with, and the upfront investment to prevent the disaster. This is a similar analogy. We would have to invest, which when you talk about government spending, most conservatives don't see what I'm describing as an investment as an investment. They see it as throwaway spending. They see it as the feeling touchy, feel good, wasting money, liberalism, and they believe that punishment is the answer. That if people are punished enough, that they'll quit being criminal.
And at what cost? It's probably true, but at what cost?
Well, that's what we argue, that we can do it a better way, but it's expensive to get to that better way because we can't dismantle the infrastructure that we have quickly.
Well, let's quickly cover this article from the Appeal, because this one's just fun. We've been tracking this one for a while. Will Alabama sheriffs finally stop diverting jail food funds to their own wallets? There's the one sheriff that took funds and bought. He raked in $750,000 from jail foods fund and infamously bought a $740,000 beach house. I'm assuming sheriffs generally don't make a ton of money. I'm sure it's not, they're not on the food line, but they're not extremely well paid. But to go out and buy a $740,000 house, and that's on the backs of a bunch of people getting just like rice and maggot filled meat and whatnot.
Well, now I'm hoping that there's not any maggot filled meat out there. That might be a little bit of hyperbole, possibly.
Maybe I'm exaggerating, but I do remember reading something in the article that talked about spoiled food, and I want to say they found dead bug carcasses in their food. I want to say that was in this particular article, of someone reporting that they had that happen. But in any case,
well, it is disturbing that this practice is apparently illegal in Alabama.
And it's still legal, and the governor asked them to sign a promise that they wouldn't do it, and some of them have been kind of reluctant to sign the thing. That's just bizarre to me. That's just bizarre.
It says Sheriff Greg Bartlett, who was briefly jailed in 2009 after he kept $212,000 from the food fund while he served prisoners corn dogs for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for several weeks. Now, that's not maggots, but it doesn't sound like a very nutritious arrangement. To
go up 2 or 3 lines of that same paragraph and you'll find what I'm talking about. It says, where the beach house sheriff presides, prisoners were served rotten lettuce, beans, and noodles, that one man called the worst food I've ever had in my life.
Well, you don't typically get complimentary feedback about correctional service food, and I mean, I wouldn't expect that it'd say good things, but on the other hand, if they're legally able to divert hundreds of thousands of dollars, there's certainly a problem in Alabama. Why doesn't someone in Alabama call us and tell us what's going on?
All right.
How is this prevented?
Okay. Well, further in the article, they say that back in the day, many of the sheriffs lived at, like, their home was at the jail, so they cooked, or maybe the other way around. The jail was attached or nearby their house, so they cooked at home. So the law was put in place so that they would have funding to help the jail. But that's not the case anymore. Nobody's like, hey, the jail is at the back door. There, it's a separate institution, so to speak. So, but the law is still there, so they're just riding on that, and they scrape a few pennies off of every meal served, and they amass this pretty significant chunk of change, all on, like, legit. It's got garbage, man, garbage. All right, let me throw this as a weird idea. Does this? Are you gonna just tell me I'm crazy? I don't want to say all laws, but should all laws have some sort of timestamp that say they expire after some number of years, that they just have to be revisited, otherwise they go away? Because this is a law, and if it was written 100 years ago where it made sense, and you said it has a 20-year expiration date, times have changed. They would force them to go back through. You don't have these just crazy bullshit laws.
Well, they do that a lot of times, but I don't know which we'd say all laws or which laws, but like the big tax cut they just did has a 10-year sunset, like the previous one they did under George W. Bush, and then it was extended permanently under Obama with congressional action.
It feels that most of them are made without those time expirations on them. It feels like the majority of them.
They are mostly made without. There are some where they have a sunset, but clearly this is an example of a law which was made in a different era of time when the jails were much smaller and they were probably much more a part of the sheriff's actually daily life than they are now. The sheriff rarely of any size county rarely has a whole lot to do with the jail in terms of the day-to-day management. They know that it's under their umbrella, but they're not spending their time running the jail.
I'm thinking of a jail like in Mayberry, that's back in your time frame, where you have like 5 cells and you got Aunt B cooking dinner and she brings in a crock pot or something so she can feed the people in the jail. I think there's some jails here in Georgia that are super duper rural where it's just like 10 cells, and I don't even think they don't cook the food in house. They just cater it.
That's exactly right. They bring stuff in from local fast foods if they've got anything nearby.
Mm-hmm.
They have creative ways of feeding prisoners, and this law apparently doesn't distinguish urban from rural. The larger jails are able to make it work for them to their advantage, it's a shame, but public service is not supposed to be collecting an additional salary off the backs of the food budget.
Yep. Ready to be a part of Registry Matters? Get links at registrymatters.co. If you need to be all discreet about it, contact them by email, registrymatterscast@gmail.com. You can call or text a ransom message to 747-227-4477. Want to support Registry Matters on a monthly basis? Head to patreon.com/registrymatters. Not ready to become a patron? Give a 5-star review at Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Or tell your buddies at your treatment class about the podcast. We want to send out a big heartfelt support for those on the registry. Keep fighting. Without you, we can't succeed. You make it possible. This next article is from Cleveland.com, and I only want to bring this up, not because of the issue or whatever. It's because there are people in the legislature that are trying to make changes to the laws that affect us. And the title is Activists Tell Brook Park Its Sex Offender Law is Counterproductive. This particular county or whatever, they're trying to institute a 1,000-foot perimeter surrounding parks. And some of our affiliates and friends up in Ohio are pushing back. And I wanted to bring it up because they're in the fight. They're actually on the ground pushing back against the proposal. And I got to think that is, if we're not there preventing things from getting worse, I just think that we're going to lose.
That is correct, and I give kudos to the Ohio people for doing their best to push back. They have very, very small numbers, just a handful of people, small handful, not even a full handful that are doing these, making this effort, and they were not successful. I think the council went ahead and moved the ordinance forward, but that doesn't stop you. That should not stop you from trying, because lobbying has a lot to do with relationships, relationship building, trust building. And if it's the first time if they come to the public hearing where they're debating the ordinance, and it's the first time they've been seen, they make it a different response the next time because they're known a little bit better. And if they work more behind the scenes, public hearings are there because they're required. Oftentimes, what's going to happen has already been predetermined. People have already studied the legislation. They've already made their mind up, and you seldom win it at the public hearing. But that's to give you the chance to comment. So my advice is if that's all you can do that. Certainly do that, but also try to get in earlier and get to an opportunity to visit with these lawmakers and have that relationship with them and give them solid answers, not emotional answers, because we don't get to be emotional. Only the victims get to be emotional. but we have to give them solid answers that they can talking point, because if they decide to vote our way, they're going to need talking points to justify their vote. And like this, it's hard to come up with talking points because they allow these residence restrictions. Apparently, cities are allowed to do this in Ohio, and the talking point that they're worried about using against them on their reelection is that, well, Councilor so-and-so did not vote for these restrictions, and therefore offenders are coming here. We're being inundated
Right.
here in the park. And that's what their fear is. So you've got to give them a talking point to rebut that. And I don't know what that talking point would be.
Right. Well, like I said, I wanted to bring it up because they're on the ground pushing back against these silliness things that don't improve any sort of public safety, but they make someone feel good. And I mean, we're all about some feeling good, right?
We are.
The next article that we've got is, actually, it is from law.com, and they're kind of funky to get to. You only get a handful of articles per month. But so the title of the article is UCSB student accused of sexual assault gets suspension tossed on appeal. Do me a favor, because I have this one all messed up in my head. Will you walk us through this one?
Well, there's dual processes when there's an accusation made. There is the prosecution potential, and then there's the school administrative action. And the school took administrative action to suspend the person. They can suspend, they can expel, they can do all sorts of things. So they suspended the student that was accused, and the student went to court, and the student won. The suspension of the school was overturned. Now, it's hard to get those days back that you weren't allowed to attend class. I get that. But the university had its hands slapped by the court saying, you've got to be more robust in your due process. And they didn't see any semblance. That was not even according to the quote. Noticeably absent in the university process was, quote, even a semblance of due process, wrote Justice Arthur Gilbert. When the accused does not receive a fair hearing, neither does the accuser. And that's what the accuser needs to understand. Our system is designed for both sides to be treated fairly. And when you destroy that, then we don't have a system. We have mob rule. We have injustice. And so this student had the university's actions overturned by the court.
Do you think one of the things that the victim's advocate would say is that they can't then continue to go to class with the person that allegedly did the crime? So maybe I could then see that person transfers to another class so they don't have to be around them. But then you're putting the burden on the victim to do it. And then the person accused is like, I didn't do anything. Why should I have to change classes?
That's the catch-22.
Maybe you transfer out of both classes. Maybe they both have to go to new places, go to neutral corner, so to speak, like a boxing analogy. But then maybe you go to a small school and that's the only class available. Now you've got people, now you sit them across the room from each other. I see that that wouldn't gain a lot of traction, I don't think.
Well, it's a dilemma, but it's one of those things of fact of life. And I'll make a horrible analogy because I hadn't thought about this until you brought this up. But what would happen if someone burglarized your house and stole all your stuff, and they were apprehended and they received probation and they made restitution or as part of the sentence to make restitution to you for the economic value, and they worked at the local grocery store where you shop?
Right.
Should they be denied the opportunity to work there because you don't like facing them because they ripped you off? I mean, like I say, that's a horrible analogy, but as quick as I could come up with.
No, and God, I have to now drive around the corner to go to a different grocery store. I live in a small town. There is only one grocery store. Now I have to drive 30 miles to go to a different grocery store or face the guy that provides me a lot of anger or stress.
But it's an even stronger analogy in one regard, because the person that burglarized your house was found guilty either by plea or by trial. This person was denied any due process, and the court said, the university, you didn't give him even anything that resembled due process, so therefore your action against him is null and void. I can't see why a student who had no due process would be denied the opportunity to continue their education.
Right. I don't disagree with you. It's just, from the victim side of it, they're going to be, they believe it happened, or they have a convincing statement that it happened. They should therefore no longer be forced to face that person on a daily basis.
Well, I'm sorry, but we're forced to deal with things in life that sometimes are uncomfortable.
Right?
And
I don't disagree with you. I feel that argument is right there and prevalent, and it's really hard to diminish that they're going to be very passionate about having that situation just constantly in their face on a daily basis.
well, I wish I could be all things to all people, but the court found the university's actions were without merit.
Absolutely. And then another article coming from the New York Times, it's about immigration. At immigration argument, Justice Kavanaugh takes a hard line. Tell us about this one.
What would you like to know about it?
What hard line did he take, first of all?
Well, it's a little bit convoluted, and it's about at what point you can be deported, and there was a difference between the there was a 1996 law that required detention even years later without an opportunity for a bail hearing, and the government's arguing that no matter how long you've been in the United States, that they can deport you for prior conduct, and that's essentially what the case is about. And Kavanaugh took a very hard line. He said that there was no time limits on it, and Justice Gorsuch said that he found that a little troubling, and that the government could not come back and deport people decades later.
Isn't it a legit argument if you are not here of a legal status that
they are here legal? These are people who are here legally.
Oh, I thought that these were against people that
these
did not arrive under
here.
legal premises.
No, these are here people that are here.
So green card or visa or whatever.
Yes.
Okay. All right then. That was
these
my
plaintiffs include people
interpretation.
who enter the country legally, tourists or students who overstayed their visas, and lawful permanent residents. And among them, immigrants who arrived in the United States as infants, committed minor crimes like possessing marijuana, and were detained years after completing their sentences. So it's about go back and give people many years after the fact and saying, well, time for you to go. But like I say, the case is still developing, so we'll see where it goes. But I just saw a very hard line with Justice Kavanaugh, and people who have optimism that he's going to be on our side.
Saving grace.
I'm not seeing any evidence early on, but hopefully it will materialize.
But we do have Gorsuch siding with us on that one.
Well,
he's the second most recent.
Well, they haven't voted yet, but he did seem to have some consternation.
Yeah. And I don't think I said it, but that was from the New York Times.
It says Cecilia Wang, a lawyer for the American Civil Liberties Union, which represents immigrants challenging the mandatory detentions, said the law requires prompt action. Mr. Tripp, taking into account other parts of the law, said immigrants convicted of crimes may be detained even years after their release. So the difference matters for hundreds of perhaps thousands of immigrants because people detained under the law are not entitled to a hearing to determine whether dangerous pose a flight risk. So like I say, it's a kind of a complicated, nuanced thing. But it's a big issue because some cities and even some states are refusing to help the government deport these people. Right. They're refusing to make their jail rosters available for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then an article from The Intelligencer. I've never heard of this one. Apparently it's a New York Mag publication. But after Kavanaugh's confirmation, the GOP will surely pass criminal justice reform. I'm going to assume that this is related to the First Step Act. And that is something I've heard that bill moving through Congress is getting a lot of bipartisan support. But then, of course, there's a bunch of quabbling on the edges about which issue or different timelines and so forth. Did I lose you again?
No.
Oh,
I was trying to get the article up, and I should have been blabbering.
You should have been. But some of the issues are about the abolition of cash bail. That's got to make the bail bondsman really mad. A ban on civil asset forfeiture. So yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of things that they're trying to push through on a criminal justice reform, but none of those issues that they're covering look like they have anything to do with the amount of time served.
Well, I put this in here because I'm hoping that the conservative side who all of a sudden have become so interested in due process, which we fully support at NARSL, and I fully support as an individual. They have been leading the fight to weaken due process all these years, to give law enforcement more powers, to impose more rigid conditions for release. For example, people, if you want to call me out, the Bail Reform Act of 1984, which made it possible for practically, in many cases, it's a majority of people that are accused in the federal system get some type of pretrial detention, pre-conviction. It may be in a halfway house, but an overwhelming number of people don't get what we would consider bail because of the Bail Reform Act. So I put the article in here. I'm hoping that this is not just a passing fad like it was when Rush Limbaugh, when he had overzealous prosecution, when he had his OxyContin problem.
Right.
Once he called out the overzealous prosecution, then he did not try to do anything to contain overzealous prosecution. So if Republicans now believe that punishing a person for a crime they did not commit was so intolerable, then I would like for them to join us do-gooders who are trying to get people out of prison who have been falsely accused and convicted, and to make the processes a little bit more fair, to provide more indigent resources, to actually be meaningful about what you're saying in terms of reforms. If you don't provide legal resources for people to defend themselves, including funds for expert witnesses, then you can't really have a robust due process. And these long sentences that were imposed by again an act of the 1980s at the federal level, the Prison Reform Act, what was pushed through in the Reagan administration, these mandatory sentences with the guidelines, those were all conservative initiatives. And now, if they're having an epiphany, I'm for it. But I'm hoping that this is not just a temporary thing that was convenient because of the Kavanaugh, because magically he illuminated the lack of process, which is right. People have been brought down with accusations that were nothing more than uncorroborated accusations. People have had their lives ruined. I agree with that. That shouldn't happen. But don't stop here, folks. We got a lot of work to do. And so I put this article in hoping that the Republicans and the conservatives will actually come through.
We're going to get so much hate mail this week on this one. You sent this next article to me directly, and it also comes from law.com. It says, banning convicted child sex predators' use of internet electronics unconstitutional, says the Third Circuit. First of all, where's the Third Circuit?
It's up there.
Thank you. That tells me up there, so it's not down there and it's not over there. I'm assuming it's up in the Northeast somewhere.
I didn't bother to look at the map, so I'm going to take a look at it and see what the map.
I thought you knew this stuff cold, man. You're slacking.
So, it is over there.
All right,
New Jersey.
All right, okay. So sort of not quite New England, but south of New England. District
of Delaware, District of New Jersey.
Okay. The mid Northeast, I guess we'll call it. And this is always a hot topic of mine. Is I just can't see how you can completely ban people. I guess in certain circumstances, like we were talking about with certain jobs and professions, but the internet is just so much a mandatory requirement for people to function that I just can't see how you could literally say you can't use the internet. But I have personally experienced where handlers, or in calling handlers about moving to some place, they say, nope, you're not going to do that here. How does that, like, not to make this about me, but how would you advise someone kind of in an abstract sense if they were trying to go somewhere and they say at the destination end that you will not be using a computer here?
Well, I say exactly what this person said. You can't do that, and he took it to court.
But you'd still have to litigate it.
Yes. Like we've said so many times, they can do, when we have that segment on NARSL, can they do that? They can do it until they're stopped. And what stops them, Andy? Well, there's two things that would stop them: external and internal. And
right.
if you're not going to stop yourself internally from doing things that you shouldn't be doing, then you have to have an external force applied to you. And the external forces that we use in America are the courts.
Right.
And this is a circuit court, which I've said before. The circuit court is the next level of supervision, but below the Supreme Court. It's a very
Right.
important level of litigation. This is a court just below the Supreme Court saying you just can't have a blanket ban. You're going to have to narrowly tailor it. You're going to have to target, but you can't just say you can't. You're banned from the internet. That won't fly. And I've told people over and over again, my opinion, a total blanket ban is unconstitutional. And the courts, when they get a chance to address this issue, they say that. But that doesn't stop people from doing it.
There's a mutual person we know in the northeast part of the state who, up until fairly recently, maybe even continues to have a full outright ban, but nobody will challenge it. But he has a full outright ban on using the internet.
Well, he'll have it until he challenges it.
And they even brought up, even a person that did get convicted of things like child porn, you could still let them go use the internet with some kind of monitoring and supervision to make sure that they're not going to places where they could end up with that material, but they could still at least apply for a job. But you could then still bank, you could still read newspapers or, websites, CNN, whatever your flavor is. But just making an outright ban, which would still then allow you to do some kind of work if your work was over the internet.
I would say that we need more challenges. We need a lot more challenges in this area, because even with the Packingham case out of North Carolina, where the U.S. Supreme Court, which is the law of the land, had said that you can't just have a blanket ban in statute from social media, that's still being enforced around the country. People are telling me that they're told this is not North Carolina. We don't give a damn about what they said in North Carolina.
But Packingham was specifically a post sentence. You're just on the registry. You're not on supervision anymore. Does this apply then to people still on supervision?
Well, that's what this case was about. This was a guy on supervised release. He was serving the tail end of his sentence, and he had a supervised release violated because they said he couldn't be on the internet, and he challenged that because he said he's got to be on the internet. And he has, in fact, he was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment and a lifetime of supervised release. So this would have essentially been a banishment for life. Yeah. And he litigated, and he litigated with the help of the United States Public Defender's Office.
And they said there was a conflict, and says, how can he use the internet at all if he may neither possess nor use a computer or electronic communication device? Which I got to tell you, there's one of my supervision requirements that is similar as far as being conflicting like that, and it says, I will never drive alone, especially where children are known to congregate. And I'm like, how could I drive where children are known to congregate if I'm never allowed to drive alone?
Seems like you would not be able to drive, period.
That's what it seems like. Well, so there's that. Well, that one intrigues me a lot. And so before we run this show into like a 2-hour timeline, we'll hit the last article. And Palm Beach County man sues to declare sex registry unconstitutional. This is from mypalmbeachpost.com, West Palm Beach, Florida area. This one's kind of cool. I'm not really sure how far it's going to go, because you will continually spout that a registry itself can be tailored in a way that would be constitutional. So to make this one just say it's unconstitutional, I see it being problematic right from the start.
Well, the Florida registry is clearly beyond what I think anybody can argue is non-punitive. But it is conceivable you could have a non-punitive registry.
And the Florida one is just crazy, like the 2,500 foot restrictions. And I'm going to guess that they have a full internet ban down there for many other people, specifically the ones on supervision. So it's just, God, this is just awful.
The 2,500 feet is not in Florida law. That's in Dade County.
Right. I'm with you on that.
It's 1,000 feet for the state statute.
They just want to be overachievers.
Yes.
That's a stellar situation with that whole city down there. Was there anything else in this article that jumped out at you?
Well, I'm going to be reaching out to the people in Florida to see if we can get the details of the lawsuit. I was not aware of it until the article popped up. But if it's anybody that's being coordinated with an arsenal group, we probably would like to have them on to talk about it. maybe the podcast or an Arsenal conference call. Florida has a very, very oppressive registry. I don't think it's the worst in the country, but it's very oppressive. And
it's probably in the top 5.
That southeast corridor of the country is very oppressive.
Mm-hmm.
Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana.
And then you just throw California in there just for good measure.
California's nowhere near as oppressive as those states are. The thing that California's registry has been tamed a lot by the litigation. They're not able to enforce most of the restrictions that they have done at the local level because of state Supreme Court rulings, and so the cities have been sued into submission on that, and it's a lifetime registry under the current law, which is changing to a tiered registry, and then the restrictions, the additional restrictions are being beat down by litigation. So, but when I'm talking about heinous, I'm talking about having sexual offender on your driver's license, paying tremendous fees to register. In Louisiana, you have to pay to notify everyone within 2,500 feet of where you're going to live.
Right.
And you go to debtor's prison if you can't do that. And those type of oppressive measures, the sexual offender on your driver's license. Can you imagine having to conduct business with your driver's license with that on there?
It would be a little intimidating. You would likely just avoid. God, that seems like a First Amendment thing. You would avoid certain situations that may just be normal, like just going to cash a check or something like that. Maybe you go to a concert or something and you have to present ID. Now you can't freedomly assemble because there has been a stifling of your speech.
Well, it has a chilling effect. Yes, I was going to say, but it's the argument that the government's forcing you to carry its message is a weak argument, because the government forces you to carry its message a lot of times on your driver's license. If you have a drunk driving, you may have to have a special interlock ignition license. If you're a minor, you may have to have a specially marked license. It may be vertical, like our state.
Okay.
That argument,
but they're related. I know, but they're related. I mean, if you have a DUI, your driver's license at least seems related. If you then transported a child around, maybe they would put something on your driver's license. I mean, at least remotely related.
So,
do you want to send us out with that outgoing quote?
I don't know. What does it say?
It says, we need to stop criminalizing. Oh, go ahead. You got it.
We need to stop criminalizing regulatory, civil, administrative violation admissions and turning people into convicted felons, which comes with severely negative collateral consequences until the day they die.
Who said it?
Bernard Kerik, former New York police commissioner.
That's a pretty powerful statement right there.
I love it, Bernard.
Well, I don't have anything else. What else do you want to talk about?
Well, I'd like to figure out how we can grow the podcast. How do we do that?
We need everybody to share the podcast with a person.
We stop being political.
Oh.
We talk about weather. Things that where we don't say anything, because it's not intended to be partisan politics. It really isn't. It's
fair.
But with the 2 comments this week, apparently people think we're on either conservative bashing or a liberal bashing. So
I will add this before we close out. Hank received an excessive amount of blue balls. He requested extra ones, and so he's been taking them around and setting them up in little displays. So if you want to hit the website this week and take a look at the picture, or look at the show notes, and you'll see a picture of blue balls in various interesting kind of situations with a little tagline.
I love it.
So check out registrymatters.co to see that.
And he wanted us to talk about the deprivation of food SNAP benefits for people who have various convictions. We didn't have enough time to get into it with enough detail, to be fair, but it's an example of what's going on in D.C. now. They're with the Farm Bill. They want to expand the prohibition, and we'll hopefully get to it in a future podcast.
All right then. Well, where can people find the website, Larry?
I don't know. I think they go to registrymatterscast.co. That's how they find it. Registrymatterscast.co.
And where do people go if they want to leave us a voicemail message or a text message even?
That would be our very favorite phone number, 747-227-4477.
How about if somebody wants to email us?
registrymatterscast. I guess that's you and I at gmail.com.
Yes, it is. And then if people want to support the show,
they go give to Patreon. Who was that said
oh
that?
my God,
Patreon.
that's another podcast. I don't want to call him out for saying Patreon. He gave me like the full English, and I was like, well, if you have this letter after this letter, and it goes before this with this kind of, I was like, oh my God, all right, dude.
Oh, okay, Patreon.com// that's a / isn't it? Registry Matters.
Everything on the internet is going to be a /
Yes.
So patreon.com/registry matters and donate all the monies, and we will appreciate it.
Yeah. So it's the minimum is $1.
Yeah, just for $1 a month, you get all the glorious, and you'll get the show released early.
And if you can do better, we would love it.
Absolutely. As always, Larry, I appreciate your time and your expertise on the subject, and I will talk to you very soon.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.